in the quiet solitude of rural Montana. The last slivers of daylight stretched, long shadows across the winding country road as Daniel Johnson's pickup truck hummed softly, carrying him home after a taxing day at the veterinary clinic. What began as a routine drive home became a moment of destiny when he discovered a tiny orphaned bobcat kitten, barely clinging to life beside its mother's body. But it wasn't Daniel who would forge the deepest bond with this wild creature. It was Buddy, their gentle golden retriever, who seemed to recognize something special in those first uncertain days as the bobcat they named Max grew from a fragile kitten into a powerful predator. The connection between these unlikely friends deepened in ways that defied explanation when Max disappeared into the forest. The Johnsons thought their extraordinary chapter had ended. They never expected the mysterious tap on their window 3 days later would unfold the astonishing series of events. This is a story of an unbreakable bond between a wild bobcat and a golden retriever. What happened next would challenge everything we thought we knew about the boundaries between wild and domestic animals. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the winding country road as Daniel Johnson drove his pickup truck home after a long day at the veterinary clinic. The October air had a distinct chill that signaled the coming winter in rural Montana. The leaves on the maples lining the road had turned brilliant shades of orange and red, creating a fiery canopy overhead. Daniel was looking forward to a quiet evening at home with his wife, Sarah, and their 12-year-old daughter, Emma. Life on their 60-acre property outside of Whitefish provided the peace and connection to nature that the family cherished, especially after Daniel's hectic days treating the animals of local farmers and ranchers. As he rounded a bend in the road about 2 miles from home, he noticed something small and dark on the shoulder. Most people might have driven past without a second glance, but 20 years as a veterinarian had trained Daniel to notice animals even at a distance. He slowed the truck and pulled over. What he found made his heart sink. A female bobcat lay motionless on the gravel, clearly struck by a vehicle. Daniel had treated enough wildlife to recognize that she hadn't been dead long, perhaps only a few hours. He was about to get back in his truck to call the local wildlife authorities when he heard a faint mooing sound. At first, he thought the mother might somehow be alive, but as he carefully approached, he realized the sound was coming from nearby in the tall grass just off the shoulder. A tiny bobcat kitten, no more than 2 weeks old, was huddled in a tight ball. Its spotted fur barely distinguishable from the dried autumn leaves. "Oh, little one," Daniel whispered, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the kitten. It was severely dehydrated and likely hadn't eaten since its mother had been killed. How it had survived even this long was a miracle. Daniel knew the chances of survival for such a young orphaned bobcat were slim, especially as winter approached. The local wildlife rehabilitation centers were underfunded and overcrowded. He made a quick decision, one that he knew might be controversial, but felt right in his heart. Carefully, he scooped up the tiny creature, which was too weak to resist, and placed it inside his jacket for warmth. "Let's get you home, little guy," he said, taking one last look at the mother bobcat. He would call the Forest Service about her remains once he got home. "I promise I'll do right by you. Daniel James Johnson, have you completely lost your mind?" Sarah's voice carried an edge of disbelief as she stared at the tiny bobcat kitten her husband had placed on a towel on their kitchen counter. "We can't keep a wild bobcat. It's illegal without proper permits, not to mention dangerous." Daniel had already prepared a mixture of kitten formula, warming it to the perfect temperature. I know, but Sarah, look at him. He wouldn't last the night at the rehab center. They're already stretched thin with 3 orphan bear cubs from that forest fire last month. Their daughter, Emma, peered cautiously at the kitten, her blue eyes wide with concern and fascination. Is he going to die? Dad, not if I can help it, Daniel replied, filling a small syringe with the formula. I've treated Bobcat kittens before at the clinic. He's dehydrated and hungry, but otherwise seems healthy. Sarah sighed, her initial resistance softening as she watched her husband gently feed the tiny Bobcat. 20 years of marriage to a veterinarian had taught her that their home would never be without animals in need. Their current menagerie already included 3 rescued barn cats, a one-eyed former racehorse named Captain, and their beloved 5-year-old golden retriever Buddy, who was currently watching the proceedings from a respectful distance, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on the new arrival. I've already called Mike at the Forest Service, Daniel continued, referring to his longtime friend who worked as a wildlife conservation officer. He's bringing over the temporary wildlife rehabilitation permits in the morning. If the little guy survives, we'll evaluate whether he can be released back into the wild. Emma had moved closer, her initial fear replaced by curiosity. What's his name going to be? Emma, Sarah cautioned, we're not keeping him as a pet. He's a wild animal, but he needs a name while he's here. Emma insisted, we can't just call him Bobcat. Daniel smiled at his daughter's logic. How about Max? He suggested, short for maximum effort, because that's what it's going to take to get this little fellow back on his feet. Max, Emma repeated, nodding her approval. I think he likes it. As if in response, the tiny Bobcat kitten let out a small squeaky sound as it finished the formula and curled up on the towel, its sides rising and falling with exhausted breaths. Buddy, who had been watching patiently from the doorway, chose that moment to approach the counter, standing on his hind legs, his front paws resting gently on the edge. He sniffed curiously at the newcomer, to everyone's surprise. He then gave a soft whine and gently licked the top of the kitten's head. What would you look at that? Daniel murmured. Buddy's already adopted him. Sarah couldn't help but smile, despite her misgivings. Fine, but this is temporary. Daniel, very temporary. Neither of them could have predicted how that moment would set in motion a friendship that would defy the boundaries between wild and domestic, a connection that would span years and bring unexpected joy to their lives. The next few weeks were to Chango for Max. Daniel's veterinary expertise was put to the test as he created a feeding schedule, monitored the kitten's health, and gradually introduced solid food. The entire family participated in Max's care, with Emma taking particular interest in recording his weight gain and developmental milestones in a special journal she had decorated with drawings of Bobcats. What surprised the most was Buddy's behavior. The golden retriever, known for his gentle temperament, appointed himself Max's guardian. He would lie for hours next to the makeshift enclosure they had set up in a quiet corner of the living room, occasionally nudging the blankets to check on the kitten. When Max was brought out for feeding or exercise, Buddy would watch attentively, his tail thumping whenever the Bobcat made progress. I've never seen anything like it, Sarah remarked one evening as they watched Buddy carefully nudge Max with his nose, encouraging the wobbly kitten to take a few more steps across the living room. For it's like he knows Max needs a friend. By December, Max had grown enough to begin exploring more of the house. Daniel and Sarah had long discussions about the Bobcat's future. While they had initially planned to release him back into the wild in the spring, they were becoming increasingly concerned about his close bonding with humans and Buddy. The problem is he's imprinting on us, and especially on Buddy, Daniel explained to Mike during one of his regular visits to check on Max's progress. At this rate, he won't develop the natural weariness of humans that he needs to survive in the wild. Mike, a burly man with a thick gray beard and decades of wildlife management experience, watched as Max playfully pounced on Buddy's wagging Tail. You're in a tough spot, Dan. He's too habituated for a normal release, but keeping a full-grown bobcat isn't realistic. Either what about a middle ground, Sarah? Suggested our property borders national forest land. What if we gradually transition him to living outdoors, but still provide some support? Mike scratched his beard. Thoughtfully, a soft release, you mean it? Could work especially with your acreage. We need to set up proper structures. Maybe a feeding station that gradually gets moved further from the house, but it would take time and commitment we've already got plenty of. Both invested, Daniel said, watching as Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, dangling a feather toy from Max while Buddy looked on approvingly. And so began the next phase of Max's journey with the Johnson family. Daniel built a spacious outdoor enclosure that allowed Max to experience the natural environment while still having shelter and protection. They began a careful program to gradually introduce the growing Bobcat to the skills he would need to survive on his own. By the following spring, Max had grown into a striking juvenile Bobcat. His once fluffy kitten fur had been replaced by the distinctive spotted coat of his species, and his once tiny body had developed lean, powerful muscles. Yet despite these physical changes, his bond with Buddy remained undiminished. The most remarkable aspect of their relationship emerged during the daily walks the family took along the 5-mile trail that wound through their property. What had begun as short, supervised excursions close to the house gradually extended further into the forest. Max would walk alongside Buddy, occasionally darting into the underbrush to practice his hunting skills before returning to the golden retriever's side. It's like they have their own language, Emma observed one April afternoon as they watched Max and Buddy explore a meadow bursting with spring wildflowers. Did you see how Max froze and Buddy immediately stopped too? They're talking to each other. Somehow Daniel nodded, amazed by the intuitive communication between the two animals. Buddy's teaching him in his own way. Notice how he waits while Max practices stalking, but won't let him get too far away. He's being a mentor. As summer approached, they began leaving the door to Max's enclosure open, allowing him to come and go as he pleased. The first night he didn't return, Sarah found Emma crying in her bedroom. He's gone, Mom, she sobbed. Max is gone. Sarah sat on the edge of her daughter's bed, stroking her hair. Honey, we always knew this day would come. Max is a wild animal, and part of loving him means letting him be who he's meant to be. What they hadn't expected was the tap on the kitchen window 3 days later. Buddy, who had been unusually subdued during Max's absence, suddenly perked up, racing to the door with an excited bark. There, peering in through the glass, was Max's golden eyes, bright and alert. Well, I'll be damned, Daniel laughed. Opening the door, Max sauntered in as if he'd never left, rubbing against Buddy before inspecting his old food bowl. Expectantly, Emma was ecstatic. He came back, he remembered us. And he's hungry, Sarah added, unable to hide her own relief as she filled his bowl with the special diet Daniel had formulated. This established a new pattern in their relationship with Max. He would disappear for days or sometimes weeks at a time, living the independent life of a wild bobcat, but he would always return, announcing his presence with a tap on a window or door, seeking out his old friend Buddy and accepting the family's affection on his own terms. 3 years passed in this rhythm of presence and absence. Max grew into a magnificent adult bobcat, nearly twice Buddy's size, with powerful limbs and the characteristic short bobtail of his species. His visits became less frequent, but no less special, particularly for Buddy, who would greet his old friend with the same enthusiastic joy each time. The family's respect for Max's wild nature deepened. They never attempted to restrain him and were careful not to treat him as a pet during his visits. He was a wild neighbor who chose to maintain a connection with them, an arrangement that seemed to satisfy everyone. It was a crisp November morning when Max made one of his now rare appearances. Daniel had just returned from feeding the horses when he noticed the bobcat sitting patiently at the edge of the yard watching the house. Buddy, now 8 years old and showing touches of gray around his muzzle, sensed his friend's presence and rushed outside, tail wagging. Furiously, the two animals greeted each other with familiar rituals, Buddy playfully bowing and Max gently batting at his ear. Daniel called for Sarah and Emma to come see, knowing how much they treasured these increasingly infrequent reunions. "He looks different somehow," Emma remarked as they watched from the porch. Now 15, she had developed her father's keen eye for animal behavior. Daniel nodded, noticing the same thing. Max seemed more restless than usual, repeatedly walking a few steps toward the forest before returning to Buddy. "I think he wants Buddy to follow him," Sarah said, voicing what they were all thinking. Daniel hesitated. While Max had never shown aggression toward any of them, he was still a wild predator with instincts and behaviors that couldn't always be predicted. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Dad. Look at Buddy." Emma pointed out. The golden retriever was clearly eager to go with his old friend, looking back at the family with pleading eyes. After a family conference, they decided to follow at a safe distance. Daniel grabbed his veterinary bag, a habit whenever venturing into the forest, and they set off behind the unusual pair. Max led them deeper into the woods than they usually went, beyond their regular walking trail and into a densely wooded section of their property that bordered the national forest. "He's taking us somewhere specific," Daniel observed as Max paused occasionally to ensure they were still following. After about 20 minutes, Max disappeared into a small clearing, sheltered by a fallen log and thick underbrush. Buddy followed without hesitation. When the family cautiously approached, they were met with an astonishing sight. There, in a well-concealed den beneath the log, lay 3 small bobcat kittens, their spotted fur and blue-gray eyes marking them as only a few weeks old. Max stood protectively nearby, watching carefully, but making no move to prevent their approach. "He's a father," Sarah whispered in awe. "He's brought us to meet his family." What happened next moved them all to tears. Buddy approached the kittens with extraordinary gentleness, lying down beside the den. To everyone's amazement, Max nudged his offspring toward the golden retriever. One by one, the curious kittens tottered over to Buddy, who began to carefully lick and groom them as if they were his own puppies. "It's like he's introducing his children to their uncle," Emma said softly, "or asking his old friend to help protect them," Daniel suggested, his veterinarian's mind already assessing the health of the kittens. "I don't see any sign of a mother. I wonder if something happened to her," as if confirming Daniel's suspicion. Max moved closer to Buddy and the kittens, settling beside them in a way that seemed to telegraph trust and reliance. Daniel, Sarah said quietly, "I think he's brought them to us for help." In that moment, the Johnsons understood the depth of the bond they had formed with this wild creature. Max wasn't just visiting, he was seeking aid from the only other family he had ever known. The weeks that followed brought new challenges and profound joys. After careful observation, Daniel confirmed his suspicion that the mother bobcat was indeed absent and unlikely to return. With guidance from Mike and the proper emergency wildlife fostering permits, the family established a support system for Max and his kittens. They built a sheltered feeding station near the den and took turns with Daniel, making daily visits to check on the kittens' health. They were careful to maintain enough distance to prevent the young bobcats from becoming too habituated to humans, a balance that was easier said than done. Buddy became an unexpected co-parent, accompanying them on every visit and spending hours with Max and the kittens. He would play with them, groom them, and even appear to be teaching them certain behaviors. Wildlife biologists who learned of the unusual arrangement visited to document this Rare cross species. Relationship in all my years studying. Wild felids I've never seen anything like this, remarked Dar Elelaner Harper, a feline conservation specialist who traveled from the University of Montana to observe the unique family it challenges what we think we know about wildlife rehabilitation and cross-species bonding. Winter settled over the Montana landscape, blanketing the forest in pristine white. The bobcat kittens grew stronger each day under the combined care of their father and their golden retriever uncle. By January, they were venturing further from the den, learning to hunt under Max's guidance while Buddy watched attentively from a respectful distance. One snowy afternoon, Emma convinced her parents to let her set up a wildlife camera near the feeding station. I want to capture what happens when we're not there, she explained, for my science project on interspecies relationships. The footage they retrieved a week later left them speechless in the quiet moments when humans were absent. Max and Buddy engaged in play behaviors rarely seen between wild and domestic animals. The golden retriever would initiate games of chase, while Max would demonstrate hunting techniques not just to his kittens, but seemingly to Buddy as well. In one remarkable sequence, the two adults worked together to herd the kittens back to the den as a coyote passed nearby. There, co-parenting, Sarah marveled as they reviewed the videos they're raising those kittens together as winter gave way to spring. The reality of another transition began to weigh on them all, particularly Emma. The bobcat kittens, now nearly 6 months old, were becoming more independent. Their need for supplemental feeding had decreased, and Max was taking them on longer excursions away from the den. They'll be leaving soon, won't they, Emma asked her father one April evening as they made their daily trek to check on the bobcat family. Daniel nodded, putting an arm around his daughter's shoulders. That's the natural order of things, honey. Young bobcats disperse to establish their own territories. Will we ever see them again? Max came back, he reminded her, and we've given his kittens positive associations with this place without making them dependent. That's the greatest gift we could offer them, a chance at a truly wild life, but with a safe harbor if they ever need it. By early summer, the bobcat family had indeed moved on. The den stood empty, and the feeding station remained untouched. Buddy seemed to understand the change, no longer pulling toward the forest clearing during their walks. The golden retriever had returned to his routine of farm life, though he would occasionally stand at the edge of the yard gazing into the woods as if waiting for his old friend. 2 years past, Buddy, now 10, had slowed considerably, his muzzle completely gray, and his once boundless energy somewhat diminished by arthritis in his hips. Daniel had started him on medication. That helped, but the golden days of racing through the forest were behind him. Max's visits had become increasingly rare, brief appearances every few months, where he would spend an hour or two with Buddy before disappearing back into the wild. The family treasured these reunions, seeing them as confirmation that their approach to raising the orphan bobcat had succeeded in giving him the best of both worlds. It was the first snowfall of November when Emma, home from her first semester at Montana State University, where she was studying wildlife biology, noticed Buddy's peculiar behavior. The old dog stood at the kitchen door whining insistently despite having just been outside. "What is it, boy?" she asked. Opening the door again, Buddy immediately trotted out into the fresh snow, looking back expectantly. Emma followed, pulling her jacket tighter against the cold. Buddy led her to the edge of the yard and then paused, his attention fixed on the tree in there. Barely visible in the swirling snow was a familiar silhouette. "Dad, Mom!" exclamation mark. Emma called back to the house. "It's Max." The bobcat emerged from the forest, his tawny coat stark against the white landscape, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, almost full-grown, came one of his offspring, instantly recognizable by a distinctive pattern of spots above its right eye. That Daniel had documented in his notes as the family watched from the porch. Max approached Buddy with the same gentle greeting they had witnessed countless times before. Then, remarkably, he stepped aside as if inviting his grown kitten to do the same. After a moment's hesitation, the younger Bobcat cautiously approached Buddy, who remained perfectly still, tail wagging gently in welcome. He's introducing his grown child to Buddy, Sarah whispered, her voice catching with emotion. He remembered in that moment standing in the gentle silence of the first snow. The Johnsons witnessed the continuation of a legacy they had helped create, a bridge between the wild and domestic worlds built on trust, respect, and an inexplicable bond of friendship. Over the years that followed, Max continued his visits, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by what they came to believe was the same offspring. When Buddy, at the venerable age of 13, became too frail to go outside in winter, they were astonished to find Max sitting patiently at the living room window, tapping gently as if asking to come inside against conventional wisdom, but trusting in the relationship they had nurtured for over a decade. They allowed the Bobcat brief, supervised visits with his old friend. Max would lie beside Buddy's bed, their heads close together in quiet communion before returning to the wild that was his true home. When Buddy finally passed peacefully in his sleep at nearly 14 years of age, the family buried him on a knoll overlooking the forest, marking his grave with a simple stone. Daniel swore he caught a glimpse of Max watching from the tree during the small ceremony, though the others hadn't seen him. A week later, Sarah found something remarkable placed on Buddy's grave, a freshly caught rabbit carefully positioned at the base of the memorial stone. Beside it, clear in the soft earth, was the distinctive print of a large bobcat paw. He brought Buddy a gift, she told Daniel and Emma that evening, her eyes filled with tears of final goodbye. The Johnson family continued their life on the Montana farm, watching the seasons change and welcoming a new golden retriever puppy named Scout into their home. The years had taught them a profound lesson about the capacity for connection that transcends the boundaries humans so often place between wild and tame, between nature and ourselves. Max's legacy lived on not just in the occasional sightings of bobcats on their property, some perhaps his descendants, but in Emma's wildlife research, in Daniel's approach to veterinary medicine, and in the story they shared with friends and neighbors. It was a reminder that with patience, respect, and love, the most unlikely friendships can flourish, bringing unexpected joy and teaching us the true meaning of coexistence. And on still winter evenings, when the first snow falls silent on the Montana forest, the Johnsons still sometimes catch a glimpse of a tawny shadow with distinctive spotted fur pausing at the edge of their yard, as if remembering old friends and the family that once became his own.